Hi, everyone. Ariana Friedlander here with Rosabella Consulting. Welcome to the Co-Creators in Conversation interview series, where we celebrate leaders who are challenging the status quo and creating economic value by genuinely caring about their people. Right now, I am really excited to be speaking with Lisa Hickey. She is a publisher with the Good Men Project and the CEO of Good Men Media. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ariana. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you. To start, I was wondering if you could tell listeners a little bit about the Good Men Project and Good Men Media Company.
Absolutely. So we started the Good Men Project just over 11 years now. And the idea was to spark a national conversation about the changing roles of men in the 21st century. And it came out of a book that was a collection of men's stories and these defining moments in men's lives.
Okay.
And as the founder, Tom Matlack, said, it was the moment when men looked in the mirror and said, I thought I knew what it meant to be good. I thought I knew what it meant to be a man. And I realized I didn't know either.
Wow.
So the Good Men Project is the online magazine that has this ongoing discussion. Good Men Media is the business entity. And so I run both the business and publish all of the articles every day, 24 hours a day,
Yeah.
305 days a year. So
oh wow. And what a really important movement then that you are leading there with the Good Men Project. I think just that awareness of a number of men sharing that experience, looking in the mirror, not knowing what it meant to be a good man and a good person. And to be able to give voice to that and then recognize the need to redefine masculinity in the 21st century. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of conversations going on actively about that. And yet it seems like such an important area and need to address.
It's so funny you say that, because I remember when we first started the business, I thought, oh my goodness, this is such a profound idea. We better hurry up and do this because everyone's going to be wanting to have this conversation. Like there's going to be so much competition. And 11 years later, I'm like, where is everyone? like nobody else thinks this is that. I mean, there are other groups of people talking about this, obviously, and approaching it a little different way, but nobody's doing quite what we are, which is to really have an ongoing real conversation about the way men's roles are changing.
And how have you seen the way men's roles being changed since you've started the company?
Yeah, it's been so interesting to see and to watch the progression. So in the beginning, it was really about being a father. So here was like another insight I didn't know, being a woman and starting this and I didn't know men thought about what it meant to be a man and what it meant to be good, like all day long. Like it didn't occur to me that was what was going through their mind. And then it seemed as if early on the big defining moment was becoming a parent, becoming a dad. And men were making a conscious choice that they weren't going to be the kind of father that they had. So their own fathers were anywhere from strict disciplinarians to outright, authoritarians, abusive dads. Really, the stories that I heard were profound and heartbreaking from these men of how they had been raised.
Yeah.
But to give them credit, they, almost all of them said, I understand my dad was a product of the times, and I am just going to make a conscious decision to do it differently with my own children.
Right.
And I just thought that was such a moving and great way of seeing the way men were actually stepping up and redefining what masculinity looked like.
Yeah. And as those conversations are happening, I'm curious, were there common threads around what they envisioned being a good father in the 21st century looked like. Because I hear they had the, an experience of what they didn't want to do or how they didn't want to show up as fathers. So were there themes with what you've been seeing and hearing it means to be a good father now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the biggest thing is just to be there for their kids, to be more engaged, to be more present, to learn not how to react in anger when their kids did something wrong, to really look at fatherhood both as something they were intuitively good at. Like, a lot of times in our society, there's the message, well, moms are the ones who are born to be a parent and fathers are not. But what we found is that dads really thought that they were born to be parents too. They had this intuitive nurturing. It was just that society tried to suck it all out of them. And so, but it was that combination of, oh, I have this in me, but there's also things I have to learn. So that's sort of an other overall theme that we've just found in talking to men about how to redefine masculinity. It's this willingness to learn, this willingness to understand that things don't have to be the way that they always were, and that they might need to learn new coping strategies, whether it's being a father, it's in the workplace, the way they deal with people, the way they be a boss. The way they just interact with their friends, the way they make sure they don't grow lonely if they're alone towards the end of their lives, like all of these things that we just kind of take for granted people, are going to be a part of living, and that actually people actually have to actively learn them.
Yeah.
And I think men especially were told in the past, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to study the way relationships work,
Right.
Go out and get the girl,
Grab the club.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's so interesting to hear. And part of, as I'm listening to you explain these shifts, it's a little bit tracking, I think, with some of the other areas of growth that we've seen in society. One big area being this shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And so there is that acknowledgement that I hear of, okay, well, men are seeing that they do have this innate capacity to father in a way that is nurturing, and they're open to learning and growing and recognizing there's areas they need to change as fathers, as managers, as coworkers, as partners. Like, it doesn't just stop there. But that is just also a mindset shift from, oh, well, I am the way I am, to I can grow and improve and change and better myself as a human. And that being kind of a part of a more healthy masculine identity. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. That you summed it up so beautifully. Like, that's the through line of sort of all of the different changes we see. And it's creating a cultural change. Like, it's, there's this back and forth, like the culture changes and then we change, and then because we changed and we're now changing the culture. And I feel like that's a lot of what's happening.
Yeah. And you said there's this kind of response to the culture changing, and yet this isn't a crowded space where there's just a lot of we're not just constantly talking about healthy masculinity, or what it means to be a good man in the 21st century. So I'm curious, what kinds of challenges or struggles have you encountered in really leading this movement?
Yeah, so I think the thing is, once men have that aha moment, once they have this epiphany, it's like the reason there's this very rigid definition of masculinity is because of the way society has pressured us to be a man in very stereotypical, obvious ways. And it's also a lot of the policing that other men do in order to maintain that status quo, anything from be a man to man up to, words I can't even say now because they would be taken as slurs, but, all sorts of ways in which men try to maintain the status quo so they can maintain that system of dominance that men have, that men are in positions of power historically and even today. And so not everyone wants to change. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles we've had. So this vision that I've talked about where men are, they're coming in and they're talking about being better fathers, and then they realize that goes into everything, into all their relationships, and they're looking for ways to be allies to marginalized people, and they're having self-awareness, and they're understanding how to have better mental health, like all those things that are going on. It's not everyone that wants to take that road. The people who are involved in the Good Men Project, who are reading our articles, coming to our phone calls, having these conversations, they get it and they're on this journey. But there's a whole lot of people that really want to keep the status quo just the way it is.
Right. Yeah. And I can even see that recently, where I remember going with my family to a circus and there being this big group of people in front of us and this little boy sitting, 4 seats down from his mom, must have been like 4 or 5 years old. And the mom said, "Pass me the backpack." And he was struggling with it. It looked big and heavy. And the mom said, "Come on, man up, you can do that." And my heart just kind of cried for him in that moment to be, put in that kind of expectation of manning up at such a young age where, clearly someone maybe could have helped him or could have been framed, differently. I wonder, like, what would be a different way to handle a situation like that, to be, creating a more healthy masculine identity.
Well, that's a great example. And I think if in that moment, the mom had just said, "It looks like you need help." Because that's another thing that we hear, that men won't go and get help when they need it. They think that they have to do these things on their own. And everybody needs help. So just refraining it from, be a man to you look like you need help would change everything.
Right. Yeah. And I think there is an element from what I'm hearing you say is, healthy masculinity is about recognizing men are humans.
Right. I know it sounds so simple, but it's so true. We totally forget that. It's so true.
Yeah. And I wonder too, so, there's challenges obviously and navigating these cultural shifts, where there's always going to be someone that doesn't want to change. There's comfort in the status quo for many people. And that's one area of struggle, but you're not just running a movement, you're running a company. Right. And I know for myself as a really purpose-driven entrepreneur, marrying the two effectively can be kind of hard. The movement, the mission can get you carried away from the fact that there's a business that you're running as well. So I'm curious, like, how do you navigate those kind of sometimes maybe competing or just different needs that have to be addressed?
Yeah, so that is interesting because we had a lot of discussions before we launched it into a business. So as I said, it was a book first, we built a platform, we built a community.
Okay, interesting.
And at that time, the founder, Tom Matlack, had been a venture capitalist. And so I had said to him, that idea about men wanting to find out about being good and wanting to know what it meant to be a man, that is just so profound. Like, I don't know if I can sell 1 million people this book, but I can sell 1 million people on that idea. And having been a venture capitalist, his first words were, "Well, then write me a business plan." And so that's that's how I got started. That's why I am CEO of Goodman Media, because I created a business plan and no one else, there wasn't anyone else to be CEO. So I took the job. But so that business aspect of it, understanding the business, understanding how it needed to be built, that was from day one. Like, it was a conscious decision to make this into a sustainable organization. We talked about whether we wanted to be a nonprofit, and I just didn't. I didn't think that the current nonprofit system was really, that had its own set of challenges, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to really create a business that could sustain this conversation and grow it in a variety of ways, create different products, create different services, really run it as a business. So that's just always been part of the exciting part of it for me also.
Tell me more. The business part, is that the
exciting? Yeah. So I'm probably the only one that I know that actually loves board meetings. Like, I get so
I actually enjoy them too. That's so funny. Yeah, so that's part of your enjoyment of running the business, it sounds like, is the people, and I'm assuming if you enjoy board meetings, you must have a pretty darn good board.
We have a wonderful board.
I think the level of enjoyment within board meetings can depend on, the kind of energy, the cohesiveness, and even a little bit of the ability to allow different viewpoints to be expressed, and address any elephants in the room. I think that those are some of the pieces I've seen that can make board meetings less enjoyable. But that sounds fantastic that you have a board that is functioning in such a healthy capacity. You enjoy those kinds of interactions.
It's really great.
And that's only one component of the business, is having the board that you work with. It sounds like you're also, developing and launching new products and offerings fairly regularly.
We try to roll out one new way of expanding the conversation every 2 years, approximately. Okay. So things like paid memberships and these phone calls, we call them social interest groups. So we have every weeknight, we have a phone call about a different topic. So on Monday, there's relationships. On Tuesday, there's stopping racism. On Wednesday, it's just the GMP playlist, where whatever headlines are most exciting. Thursday is climate change, and Friday is the call with the publisher. So we have
that's with you then, I presume.
That's with me. That's my product. But we really like that it's just an old-fashioned conference, phone conference. So people can't really see each other. They can only listen to the value of other people's ideas, which we find really important. And people who show up are as young as 16, as old as 95, wow. From all over the world, actually. Sometimes people call in from Singapore or the UK or Canada or Spain. It really has become an international conversation. And so that was kind of a big product that we launched that really changed things, because there was something about live conversations that was just fundamentally different than, articles or even the comment sections or social media. It's like we're in a room together figuring this out in real time. So that was great. Yeah.
That sounds really powerful and amazing. The variety of attendance that you see there as well. It makes me wonder, obviously there are some people that just don't want to drink the Kool-Aid, if you will, regardless of what you're offering. But then as you do bring people together with such a variety of backgrounds, how do you handle differences in those conversations? You have a 16-year-old and a 90-year-old. I imagine there are things that they don't necessarily see eye to eye.
Yeah, it's been a lot of learning.
Mm.
We've gotten to the point where the people who have been showing up regularly to these calls, so it seems to be always the same mix. Like there's always someone who's been coming to the calls for 10 years, and then there's somebody who was active 5 years ago and is just coming in to say hi now, and then there's someone who's the first time and they're like, what is this all about? And so I feel like it's this great almost mentoring structure that we've built, where the people who have been coming for a long time really help the other people understand how to get into it in a productive way. And sometimes the conversations have fallen apart. If somebody is really actively trying to derail the call, is actively being a troll in a way, or just really pushing back or attacking other people. But even then we've learned, okay, just mute them, move on,
Okay.
So I feel like we've encountered all of these obstacles and just sort of dealt with them as they've come up.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I think, kudos that you're creating that space where those challenging situations can arise, because that's very courageous. I think you're, losing a little bit of control, which is kind of the, more old style masculine identity. So like really walking the talk a little bit and creating that space where it's less about just overall control and more about allowing people to be people. And sometimes they take it too far. And so you got to deal with that in very specific ways, but generally it doesn't sound like that happens, that frequently.
Exactly. It really doesn't. I think the people who come to the phone calls are already wanting to look at masculinity with a more open, inclusive lens,
Right.
So they understand the basics.
Yeah. So then that's a service that you launched a few years ago, it sounds like, or 10 years ago?
I think that was about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay. So, and you like to launch new things every few years. So, more recently, kind of how have you married the movement with the business side?
So our most recent undertaking is that we are getting into the diversity, equity, and inclusion business, and we've created a really robust curriculum where we can go into corporations and run workshops that talk about sexism, racism, homophobia, disability rights, all of the sort of oppressive things that happen in our society, what that looks like in a workplace, but then why men actually resist the change to those, and how to get men involved, how to get men to be allies, how to get everyone to be allies for each other. And so they're both a class and an interactive, we're sort of marrying the best of the content that we get on Good Men Project that talks about these, sometimes in a very academic or research-based way, with the personal stories and narratives, with the ideas from these phone calls where we really dive in and just talk about the issues very intimately. So the program we offer to corporations is a blend of all that.
Wow, that's really interesting and intriguing to hear. There are these issues that need to be addressed, these opportunities for inclusion, but I haven't heard before of bringing front and center and calling out the resistance that is, might be experienced in such efforts. And so I imagine that is a really powerful piece of what you bring into companies there.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the resistance, it's when we talk about it in these workshops, it's getting men to see in themselves why they might be resisting, but also it's helping the people who are organizing these things and trying to make change, trying to make cultural change in their organizations and coming up against the resistance. And so helping them understand why there is the resistance, helping men understand why they are resisting, seems like a piece that we need to break through on. So that's what we try to do.
Yeah, well, and it brings it back to that humanness. I think that resisting anything, change, direction, that we all have different things where resistance creeps up within us. It's just part of being human.
Yeah.
So it's not like, that's just you, there's something wrong with you, you're resisting it. Or we all, I think, encounter those moments where we experience some resistance, and to be able to lean into that instead of kind of try to suppress it or pretend it's not there, helps tremendously.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I like that it really is a very human thing. Like, I was just thinking, when technology changes on my computer, when there's a new interface, I'm like, wait, why did you change that? I liked the status quo. and so, but I have to overcome that resistance, and I have to understand that it's ultimately going to hopefully make my life better if I just dive in and make the change.
Right. Yeah. And technology changes is just one area where it happens,
Exactly.
There's also just changes in the weather that we can resist as much as we want to, but we also just have to deal a little bit. So wow, this has been such a fascinating conversation with you to explore this topic. Feels, I will say, a little awkward having this topic of a conversation around masculinity, and we're both women. So wondering if you have any thoughts around, what is the role women can play in supporting a more healthy masculinity?
Yeah, so I totally think women have to play a part and have to understand. First of all, it just gives more empathy to everyone if we understand as women what men are going through and why they're dealing with things in the way that they're dealing with. And then supporting men is so important in this. And I think, we see a lot that men think they really feel like they're targets, especially if you're like a straight white man, you feel as if you're being targeted everywhere. So understanding that feeling, understanding it as someone who's coming from a marginalized group, someone who, I don't know about you, but I experienced a lot of sexism in my life, and I had to figure out how to deal with that. And I think that's why, even things like the Me Too movement, it's not just about women and what they're going through. It's the fact that women are having these problems because men are in the equation too. And together we have to step up. Together we have to look at these problems. Together we have to solve them and figure it out. So I just don't really see it as, us versus them or something that's exclusionary. Like, we talked very early on about at the Good Men Project that we were not going to exclude women. We were going to have women writers. We were going to have a woman CEO. I got a lot of flack for that, but I insisted that it was important. It felt like part of the vision that women need to be involved in the conversation about masculinity, just as men have to be involved in the conversations about the changes women are going through. So yeah, it's always sort of been the very fabric of the business we created.
Yeah, sounds like it. And I think empathy is a skill that is very valuable in all facets of life. And one of the things that might be important for listeners to keep in mind is that empathy isn't making excuses. Right. It's not saying, oh, you get a pass. I feel bad for you, or I feel for you. So I'm not going to hold you accountable for some egregious action or words.
Right.
That those are two separate things. And I think that sometimes people can get confused there a little bit. I don't know what you've experienced, but I think that sometimes there can be some confusion around the fact that if you feel for somebody else, then you're excusing bad behavior, and that's not the same thing.
No, that's a really good point. I hadn't heard it quite articulated like that, but I think it's so important to understand that empathy is actually understanding why the other person did what they did and holding them accountable. Accountable.
Right.
Like the accountability is part of the empathy, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like saying, I value you as a person and I know you are better than this.
Exactly. Exactly.
So wonderful. Well, you know, as you're aware, and our listeners, this is the Co-Creators and Conversation interview series. And I always like to hear from interviewees, what does co-creating look like in your organization?
Yeah, we love the term co-creation and co-creators, and we think of ourselves as very much constantly creating together, constantly evolving how we create.
Mm-hmm.
We're all virtual, but we work together on shared spreadsheets and documents and technology, and then we come together on calls, and we really work to, there's no real hierarchy. We just work together to figure out problems and to solve them together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's especially apparent in the writers who have written for us over the years. So we have 130,000 articles on our site, I think. Wow. At this point, by over 10,000 different authors. And many of those had their first published piece be on the Good Men Project. So the first time they had ever written anything that had gotten published was on our website. And then we see those same people go on to eventually sell books or get speaking engagements or open consulting firms or go work, get a job at other major media. And it's just such this wonderful feeling to say, they started here. They thought this conversation was important. So they wrote down something in order to help themselves articulate it better. And then that became a catalyst for all these other amazing changes in their life. And so that to me feels like just the epitome of co-creation, our ability to help them do that and to guide them through that process.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a beautiful explanation of how co-creating looks there. And especially that really illuminates how the sum is greater than the whole of the parts with co-creating, in the sense that, you provide not just this platform, but the support. And through that, people not only contribute to the Good Men Project, but they also contribute to their own growth and trajectory and having positive influence in the world, which is so cool to hear.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I never get tired of that.
Yeah,
that happen.
I can imagine. Now, if someone that's listening would like to follow up and get in touch with you or the Good Men Project, what's the best way for them to do that?
So our website is goodmenproject.com. You can email me personally, lisa@goodmenproject.com. There's also just a general info@goodmenproject.com. But would love to hear from you. And we would love to have people who want to join as writers, who want to come to our calls, who want to support us in any way, who just want to read our articles. I mean, any way that you want to be involved is great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us today and sharing your story with the Good Men Project. It's been so wonderful to hear. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Ariana.
Yeah,
Take
my
care.
pleasure. And thank you to our listeners as well. It's been great to have you on this journey. If you want to check out more episodes, you can go to rosabellaconsulting.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of the new episodes that are coming out. And I always encourage listeners to identify just one little piece of inspiration they received from a conversation and experiment with how they could take action on that little piece of inspiration. You might share it with a friend and just, explore how you can improve in your own journey and co-creating positive change. So thanks to our listeners, and thank you again, Lisa, for joining us today. Take care.